Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Factory Farm Nation 2024. Today, we'll hear from members of our team from across the country about the impacts of factory farming on our communities, small-scale farms, and the planet, and how these impacts are only getting worse. I'm Alexa Reynaud with Food and Water Watch, and we'll get started in just a minute. Folks, welcome. All right, we can go on ahead and get started as people continue to join. Welcome everyone to the webinar. Again, I'm Alexa Reynaud, an organizer with Food and Water Watch, and we have a fantastic lineup of members of our team from across the country to talk with us today. I'll introduce them in just a moment, but before we get started, I just want to go over a quick orientation. If you aren't joining us on screen share, we highly recommend doing that by clicking the link in your email. We're here on video with slides that we'll be sharing throughout the presentation that you don't want to miss. If you have a question at any point in the presentation, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can throughout and at the end of the webinar. You also have the opportunity to submit questions to our panelists beforehand, so we'll try to incorporate and answer some of those as well. And with that, let's hop in. A few weeks ago, Food and Water Watch released a new report and interactive map, Factory Farm Nation 2024 edition. This analysis of the United States Department of Agriculture's most recent Census of Agriculture has found dramatic changes in how animals are raised in this country. Today, there are 97 million more animals living on factory farms than 5 years ago. This is a 49% increase compared to how many animals were living on factory farms more than 20 years ago. We're seeing the get big or get out policy happening in real time. This is a policy that was kicked off by the USDA secretary in the 1970s, with dramatic impacts still happening today. Over the years, unchecked agriculture company mergers have allowed the industry to consolidate, drive family-scale agriculture off the land, and pollute our air and water. Tonight, we'll talk with our research director, who will go over the map and talk about the findings of our research. Then we'll hear from organizers from our factory farm team about the impact factory farming has on each of their states and how you can take action to build a better food system for all. Finally, we'll have a short Q&A session towards the end of this webinar where we hope to answer some of your questions. So with that, I'm going to kick us off with some introductions, then I'll pass it over to our speakers for the evening. First, we will hear from Amanda Starbuck. Amanda is the research director for Food and Water Watch, who led the Factory Farm Map project and directs all of our projects across the organization, from food to water to climate. Then we'll hear from Emily Tucker. Emily is a Food and Water Watch organizer based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they work with our New Mexico volunteer team to advocate for a better food system for all. Next, we'll hear from Amy Stone, another Food and Water Watch organizer that is based out of Portland, Oregon, where she is working to mobilize Oregonians to take a stand against the expansion of factory farming in the state. Finally, we have Jennifer Breon, our final Food and Water Watch organizer we'll hear from tonight, who is based out of Iowa City, Iowa, where she is helping to lead campaigns against factory farm pollution and false solutions. And with that, I'll pass it off to Amanda to get us started with the research and the map. Amanda, go ahead and take us away.
Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight. Yes, so tonight I'm going to go over our latest research as mentioned. So this is a relatively large project that mapped factory farm density across the US. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the data that we had behind that and some trends that we've seen in factory farm growth. I'm going to introduce you to that map tool and also introduce you to the report and the other resources that we have available. So our primary data for this map is, as mentioned, the USDA Census of Agriculture. And this is a census that comes out every 5 years, most recently released in February of this year. And it's a census that goes out to every single farmer in the US. It has maybe about a 60% participation rate, but USDA actually has some methodologies to try to fill in some of those gaps that they have. And the survey basically collects information on the type of farm, whether or not you have animals, how many animals you have, what kind of crops you grow, what are your demographics, all sorts of stuff. And it also breaks this down by operation size. So we're able to get a picture, at least, of the size and number of operations that are raising animals across the US. It doesn't disclose where these farms are located. There's a lot of that kind of protects the identity of farmers, and it doesn't disclose whether or not these animals are being confined or not. But when you get into these larger categories, we have a pretty good idea that some of them would probably, most of them would probably be confined operations. So we have on this figure here on the right that shows you what we consider a factory farm using this data set. So beef cattle on feed, those are ones that are already in feedlots. Dairy hogs, broiler chickens, which are meat chickens, and egg-laying hens. Those are the sizes that we use that we consider to be on factory farms. Next slide, please. So from this data set, we were able to figure out that there's about 1.7 billion animals living on factory farms at any given time. And together they produce twice the weight and manure that the entire US population produces in a year. So that's a significant amount of waste. And we need to keep in mind that this waste is oftentimes not treated before it's being spread onto cropland and fields. That really contributes to a lot of water pollution in the US. And these trends are only growing. We're seeing more and more animals added to factory farms every year. Just the additional animals added in between the last two censuses produces more manure than the entire state of California. So a huge addition. Next slide. We've also seen trends in factory farms getting larger. There's about the same number of factory farms today as there were 20 years ago. However, the average size of those operations is growing. And then the continued collapse of family scale farms. So these are the ones that are smaller than those size categories that I mentioned. For instance, there's about a third fewer dairies in the US today than there were just 5 years ago. And in California, it's closer to one half as many. Next slide, please. And this kind of reiterates again that big get big or get out mentality that we've seen. So this is looking at Iowa specifically, and the bar graph is showing you the total number of farms in Iowa that sell hogs. Now we go back to 1982, it was pretty common for farms to have, maybe hogs on the side, as well as maybe some corn and soybeans and other crop rotations that they had. But as the years went on and corporate consolidation grew, there's more and more pressure for farmers to specialize, to either raise just crops or raise just hogs. It led to a bleeding of Iowa hog farms. And then again, the operations that remained got larger and larger. So the bar graph shows you that in the 80s, there were nearly 50,000 farms in Iowa selling hogs. Today, there's fewer than 6,000. However, those farms have gone from selling an average of under 500 hogs a year to over 11,000. So keep in mind, again, we consider a factory farm to be a farm that has about 1,000 hogs at a time. So the average farm selling 11,000 is pretty substantial. Next slide, please. We also have the environmental justice angle to consider here too. As I mentioned before, these operations produce significant amounts of manure. So this is a picture of our density map of Iowa for hogs. And as you can see, as the colors get darker, the counties have higher and higher density of factory farmed animals. The white dots are showing the ones that are really the extreme outliers in here. And this is showing, basically comparing the amount of hog waste to human waste. So in counties like Palo Alto County, for instance, hogs produce over 200 times the amount of waste as the human residents do. Once again, unlike human waste, this waste is not treated before being released into the environment, which really, again, contributes to the water pollution that Iowa and the rest of the country is dealing with. So next slide will tell us a little bit more about this methodology. It's in our report, so I'm happy to share that with you at the end of this webinar as well. But just to give you an idea, again, what we did is we took the total number of animals in each county, looking at 5 different livestock categories, and then the all livestock category basically aggregates them into one based on weight. So it takes into account, for instance, a cow weighs a lot more than a chicken. And we took the total number of livestock and divided it by the county's square miles, and that gives us the livestock per square mile. And then we took those numbers and put them into 4 different categories. So counties that had none were just given automatic gray. And then the remaining counties, we tiered them into the lowest 25%, second lowest 25%, then the third highest and the highest. And so what you get here are what we call a quartile distribution. We did that for 2002. And then we kept those same benchmarks as we went forward so that we don't have a true quartile every single year. You would have the same amount of counties, in the dark red zone. Instead, we kept those benchmarks for 2002 so that over time you see additional counties that become dark red, showing again that this concentration is really worsening over the years. And then we added an additional category this time around. This is the extreme outlier dot. This is based on the counties that would be in the top 1% for animal density in 2002. Again, we kept that same benchmark, so moving forward, we see more and more of these dots being added to the map. Next slide, please. All right, so this is what we're left with. So here is the map, again, looking at all livestock. So once again, it's a weight-based measurement that takes into account the differences in weights between cows and chickens and cows and chickens and pigs. And as you can see here, the counties that have the darker colors are the ones that have the most extreme density of factory farms animals. The white dots, again, showing those extreme outliers. And this is for the 2022 Ag Census year. So not surprisingly, you're seeing a lot of concentration in places like Iowa. We know a lot of that is hogs, although Iowa also has a substantial number of chicken laying operations. You see the Great Plains, that is home to about 3/4 of our nation's feedlot cattle. Out west, you're seeing a lot of concentration, and that is the growth of mega dairies. There's been, a lot of growth in mega dairies towards the western part of the United States. You also see that in the Northeast, legacy dairy states that are really losing family farms and being replaced by factory operations. And then the Southeast, you have a lot of like broiler operations as well as hog operations as well. So this is a problem that is really affecting all of the US. Next slide. So this is what you get to when you click on the map link on our report. So we have 6 different maps, one map for each of those 5 livestock categories. And again, another map that's showing the all livestock combined together. So I'm going to give you a quick little tutorial. We're going to go into the hog map now. So on the next slide here, we'll show you what you get when you click on that. So it comes out with, this is an interactive map. So you get to move around and explore the map yourself. So I'll just do some kind of screenshots tonight to show you what that looks like. So you open it up and you get a view of the United States. Again, you can see for hogs, especially, this is a problem, especially in places like Iowa, Minnesota, North Carolina as well has a lot of hog density. Next slide will show you how, if you want to open up that legend, again, to be reminded of what those different colors mean, there's a little bar here on the left where you can open up the legend. The next slide is going to point out some navigation tools. You can use the plus and the minus to zoom in and out of the map, but you can also double click, or if you're on a tablet or a phone, you can kind of do the scrolling in, zooming in with your fingers to zoom in into any location of the map. You can also click on it and drag it to change the view. And then finally, the next slide is going to highlight our slider. So this is new this time around as well. We have the ability to show the changes over time because we have these same calculations from 2002 and every 5 years up until 2022. So the next slide, we're going to just zoom in. Let's say we want to know what's going on in Polk County, Iowa. That is where Des Moines is located. So you can zoom into any area of the map, and if you click on a county, you get a pop-up box that gives you some very basic information about factory farms in that county. So from this, we can learn that Polk County has a density rating of 2, which means it has a moderate amount of hogs on factory farms. It has one hog farm that was recorded in the census, raising nearly 9,700 hogs. And in total year, we estimate that many hogs would produce about 31 million pounds of manure. And that comes out to a density rating of about 16 hogs per square mile. So the next slide here, I'm going to again show you, there's this little arrow down here where you can actually play, and it will basically start with you back at 2002 and show you the changes year by year. So the next slide is going to be a video that's going to show that. Here we go. And you can see as the years go on, more and more counties are really kind of moving into those upper, really severe density rankings, especially an additional those extreme outlier dots as well. So the next slide is going to show from, oops, let me play it again. From the US perspective. We'll watch that again from the US and see how that looks. And at any point in time, you can pause the video as it's going, and you can also click on the slider and move between the different years as well. If you wanted to stop and look what would happen, what it looked like in 2012 or 2017, for instance. All right, so the next slide here, again, we're gonna do a couple more navigational tools on the map. So one way, as I mentioned, to toggle between the different layers is to just click on that slider and move it around. But you can also go to the layers tab, and that is on this left-hand column here. Basically, in ArcGIS, the topmost layer that's visible is what you're going to see. So right now, you're going to only see 2022. If you want to see 2017, you unclick that eye icon and it will show you 2017. And again, just keep unclicking that to get down to the different layers. The next tab will show you as well how you can open up the different tables we have. So there's a whole wealth of data behind all of these maps here. And if you want to get information on many counties at once, what you can do is open up the 2022 layer, open up the hot density layer, and then click on Show Table. And then you will get, shown on this next slide here, oh, there we go, a table that will pop up. And so here I clicked on Washington County within that table and zoomed to, and it took me exactly to Washington County, Iowa. And that gives you all that same information for every single county in the US that I had mentioned in that original pop-up box. And you can also, for instance, if you want to sort it by something else, right now it's alphabetical, but you could sort it by, the highest ranking counties, the highest density, factory farms, the most manure production, you name it. You can really kind of play around with this data a lot. Another search tool you can do as well, and I'll show you on the next slide here. You can also just type in the name of a county. So these maps are pretty smart. You can type in every, even an address here as well. But if you want to look at a specific county, you just type in your county using the search bar. You can see it on the right there, the little magnifying glass, and it will take you directly to that county as well. All right, and then finally too, we have some additional tools that you can use here on this map. If you want to print, a view of this map here, we have the whole US, but you can print one just of your county, whatever you're interested in. There is a print icon on the left over here. We can print in PDF form, JPEG form. But I will say too, if you need to use a very nice high resolution image of the map for your purposes, just let us know as well. We can create some much a little bit better resolution imagery on our desktop version than we can here. All right, and the next slide is going to show you as well. So as I mentioned before, this is part of a larger project. So we have the maps that you just saw, the 6 different maps. We also have a report that we came out with, and this came out in both a digital as well as a PDF so you can download. And we also have 6 different state fact sheets, including the 3 states that are represented on this call today. You can get these all from this code here, but I think we're also going to be sharing out probably after the webinar additional links as well for all of this information. And as well in that original map landing page that I showed you, there's also what's called a story map. And it's a really good way if you've never really used maps before and you want kind of a more curated navigation. It basically walks you through different map views. You can still play around with them, but you can't like toggle on and off layers or time. You can just kind of zoom in and out. And it's a really good introduction to the map, and it tells a story along the way as well. So yeah, before I end, I think just it's important to talk about what these maps can be used for and what they can do and what they can't do. So what they're really good for is showing, again, those changes over time that we've seen in density. Fantastic for if you want to, approach a leader in your state and you want to talk about, factory farms in your county. It's some really go-to information for finding out the number of factory farms, the number of animals on those operations, estimates for total manure production, all of this. Really good information to have in your toolbox. And from a reputable source, the USDA, has one of the most comprehensive data sets on farms in the US. What it doesn't do, and what people oftentimes look for in our map, but unfortunately doesn't show you where these farms are specifically located, right? They'll tell you the density within an entire county, but it's not going to show you a GIS location where the maps are, where the farms are. That information simply is not provided by USDA for privacy reasons. And it is really difficult to produce a map. It'd be basically impossible to produce a map from the US level that shows the location of every single factory farm, simply because most of them are not reported, or a lot of them are not reported. Reporting really varies state by state. There are, states that don't require as, robust of, permits and don't really necessarily have databases for factory farms in those states. And even states that do, states like Iowa, where you can download information on where these factory farms are, increasing information on like satellites and flyovers and stuff have shown that there are factory farms that are not being accounted for within these state databases as well. So there is no unfortunately comprehensive go-to database that shows you where every factory farm is. But I do think that for the purposes of our theory of change, is we're showing, we're not trying to call it individual farms necessarily, we're trying to call out the problem as a whole and show that, look, because we're not stopping factory farms, it's getting worse year in year, and here's, the data behind it to show it. So I think it's really important to go over what you can do with this map. And I'll happy to answer any questions you might have on it as well, or reach out to the organizers in your state. We'd love to help you use this resource. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that excellent overview of the report and the map. It's really cool to see all the ways that we as organizers for Food and Water Watch, as well as other people out in the field and people watching, can also utilize this resource. Before we transition to our state work, I wanted to give folks a quick reminder that we'll be emailing out the resources and the recording of the webinar, as well as any additional resources we cover. If you have any questions for Amanda, be sure to pop them in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We will also be dropping links to take action in the chat now and throughout the webinar. The link you'll see coming now is a dashboard where you can see upcoming events we have across the country and to learn more to take action on factory farms. And so now that you have that bird's eye view of factory farming, we're going to talk about the work Food and Water Watch is doing in some specific states across the country. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Emily Tucker first to talk more about our work in New Mexico. Emily, go on ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexa. And thank you, Amanda, as well as the research team for putting this fantastic resource together. The research is just so telling, and the map is such a fantastic resource to have for this work. I want to talk about how this explosion of factory farms is kicking off a factory farm biogas bonanza across the country, and how we are very concerned about the build out of this false solution in New Mexico, where I organize. So New Mexico has a rich history of family agriculture. We have incredible farmers markets where family farmers can get produce directly to consumers. And we know that family farmers are fantastic stewards of the land, with the model in and of itself being inherently more sustainable than the factory farming model. However, in New Mexico, we have seen similar trends to what has been happening across the country. We're losing our small farmers to factory farms, as you saw in Amanda's presentation. In New Mexico, most of the factory farms are mega dairies. These mega dairies are largely concentrated, as you can see on the map, on the slide, in the southeastern and south central part of New Mexico, so specifically around Las Cruces, Roswell, and Clovis. Okay, next slide, please. Over the past 5 years, we've lost 44% of our family scale dairy farmers in New Mexico. 44%. And at the same time, we've actually seen factory dairy farms themselves become even larger over the past couple decades. Today, New Mexico's mega dairies each confine an average of 3,685 cows per farm, and that is a 20% increase from the previous USDA Agriculture Census just 5 years ago. This makes New Mexico fifth in the United States for average mega dairy size, as we see the biggest mega dairies only continue to get bigger. So that is the state of things here. And we are talking about this issue at a really crucial time, because in New Mexico and all across the country, we've seen false market-based solutions to climate issues just like factory farming. One of these false solutions is biogas, or as we like to call it, factory farm gas. Biogas is a false solution. It will not solve the climate crisis, and it will only further entrench factory farms. So a quick primer on what it is for those of you who are unfamiliar. It is liquid manure. So essentially liquid manure from cows is pumped into this huge airtight tank where it remains for a few weeks. Inside, the bacteria produce a gas that contains carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen. The CO2 and nitrogen is either flared or released into the atmosphere, leaving behind methane that is chemically identical to fossil fuel gas. And so here's the thing. Biogas production does nothing to address the full issue of factory farms. Right, we need and deserve a better food system. And even if biogas did actually take care of all the methane emissions factory farms produce, which it does not, even if it was a clean fuel, and it's absolutely not, we would still have the issue of the largest factory farms being able to profit off their own waste stream. Profiting from this waste stream only further entrenches factory farms and fossil fuels at a time when we need an urgent transition to truly clean energy. So this has been done in California most prolifically. We've seen their low carbon fuel standard, which is a market-based carbon trading scheme, lead to the entrenchment of factory farms by incentivizing biogas digesters across the country. And in New Mexico, we passed an extremely similar program last session, our Clean Transportation Fuel Standard. With the presence of factory farms in the state, we are very concerned that something similar will happen here. We've already been seeing the industry clamor towards this program. The Advisory Committee for the Clean Transportation Fuel Standard is packed with industry. We have a panel of about 30 members who range from oil and gas companies, consulting companies, to Taos Ski Valley for some reason. There is one professor from the University of New Mexico who spoke on environmental justice during the hearing, and a couple coalitions that claim to be advocating for clean energy, but they also see biogas as an acceptable path forward. So biogas is not a theoretical in New Mexico by any means. It is something that is being talked about in the advisory committee already, and if left unchecked, the expansion of biogas would only entrench factory farms in New Mexico and continue to allow the biggest to get bigger by profiting off their own waste stream. So that is where we are at in New Mexico. So I'm happy to take any questions during the Q&A if you have them. So I'll pass it back to Alexa.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing all of that information. I'm also in New Mexico, so this issue is very close to my heart as well. If you do live in New Mexico, just like us, be sure to click on the link that you'll be seeing coming up in the chat for some opportunities. Remember, you can also submit your questions to the Q&A button below as well. Now we're going to hear from another one of our Food and Water Watch organizers, Amy Stone, about our work in Oregon. And with that, Amy, on to you.
Thanks, Alexa. Hi, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the research team for all the effort with this map. I also want to thank Emily for that amazing breakdown of what's going on in New Mexico. With this map, it makes the information about factory farming accessible to all, which is so important because this is definitely an industry that is shrouded in secrecy. Oregon has seen a major rise in the expansion of industrialized animal agriculture across the state. Oregon currently has 55 factory farms altogether, and 11 of those are mega dairies. In fact, 9 of Oregon's 36 counties rank severe for factory dairy cow density. As you can see on the map, we have a concentration in the Northeast. We have one out toward Eastern Oregon, and that's the areas of Maroon. In mega dairies are gaining a foothold out west, helping drive the get big or get out phenomenon in U.S. agriculture. When talking about the impact of factory farming in Oregon, I'd like to highlight 2 key issues: the corporate consolidation that has led to factory farming dominating the market, and the enormous amount of waste produced by this industry, which has led to dangerous levels of nitrates contaminating our water. Next slide, please. Similar to what we've seen around the country, the rise of factory farming in Oregon is due to corporate consolidation in the animal ag sector. The map shows that since 2001, the total beef cattle on factory farmed feedlots has nearly doubled. The average beef factory farm now confines about 13,000 cows. In the same time span, mega dairies have also reported a 50% increase in herd sizes, while also reporting the loss of 620 family scale dairies. This data shows a massive expansion in factory farms, but also a significant decline of family scale dairies. All of this to say that while industrialized factory farms have shown tremendous growth, our family scale farmers can no longer compete, leading to the decimation of local farming communities. You've likely heard of Tillamook Creamery, an Oregon-based company that prides itself as being a worker-based cooperative of family scale farmers. In reality, they are a perfect example of corporate consolidation and the common misconception of our modern day system of agriculture. Tillamook Creamery may have started as a family scale cooperative back in 1909. However, they have grown tremendously after adopting the factory farm model. In 2001, Tillamook started sourcing much of their milk from a mega dairy called 3 Mile Canyon out in Boardman, Oregon. 3 Mile Canyon confines about 70,000 cows on mega dairies and in dirt feedlots. 3 Mile Canyon Farms also regularly opposes our efforts to restrict their ability to expand their operation and further pollute the environment. Next slide, please. This is a photo of 3 Mile Canyon. And just want to put that out there. Oregon's 11 mega dairies confine over 98,000 cows and produce roughly 4 billion pounds of waste every single year. This is the equivalent to 2/3 of our state's human population. And in 2022, milk cows in Oregon's factory dairy farms produce enough manure to overflow 2.5 Olympic swimming pools each day. To put this into perspective, these mega dairies produce as much waste as a small city, but Unlike cities, these facilities do not have proper waste treatment systems. Instead, they store their waste in open pit cesspools, which the industry likes to refer to as lagoons. This waste is then sprayed on nearby crop fields where it inevitably seeps or runs off into the ground and contaminates both groundwater and surface waters. This obviously will jeopardize the health of our communities and aquatic ecosystems. With all of this being said, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the communities surrounding 3 Mile Canyon have been facing an ongoing water contamination crisis for 34 years. This is a region where well testing has found that the levels of nitrate contamination far surpass the EPA safety threshold of 10 milligrams per liter. This chronic exposure causes a myriad of health risks, including certain types of cancers, reproductive issues, and something called blue baby syndrome. This is why we are fighting back against factory farms here in Oregon. We are tired of seeing the expansion of Big Ag's relentless pursuit of profit, which is always at the expense of our environment, workers, and the economic sovereignty of our community. Next slide, please. The data from this map makes it strikingly clear that our state, along with the rest of the nation, cannot sustain the environmental impacts of unchecked expansion of factory farming. It isn't just an environmental issue. This is a fight for social justice, public health, and the survival of our family scale farms. This is why we are fighting for a moratorium on new and expanding factory farms in Oregon. This moratorium would give legislators the time to enact stricter environmental regulations, invest in our local food systems, and protect our communities rather than the corporations who have had the upper hand for far too long. If you're interested in joining the fight to protect Oregon from factory farms, please click on the link in the chat to see how you can get involved. Together, we can stop the destructive cycle of greed-driven corporate consolidation and environmental harm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing that startling story of Tillamook and all of the work that we're doing in Oregon. We're going to drop a link again with the information on how to get involved with Oregon factory farm work into the chat. And then we are going to move on to our final speaker, another Food and Water Watch organizer, Jennifer, based out of Iowa City, Iowa, to talk about our work there. Jennifer, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Alexa and Amy. So the Iowa portion of the map tells a story of scale. The research team created the new factory farm map in part because it was difficult to accurately convey the size of the industry in Iowa relative to other states. Iowa has 4,200 large factory farms with over 1,000 animal units each. There are approximately 24 million hogs in Iowa, 8 times as many hogs as people. We are also home to 3.6 million cattle, 58 million egg-laying chickens, and 12 million turkeys. You can see that most of the map is purple because of the sheer number of animals. We've reached a saturation point where every corner of the environment and the lives of everyone in Iowa are affected in some way by industrial animal pollution. The extreme outlier dots on the map are counties that surround some of the largest slaughterhouses in the world. So, for example, Washington County in southeast Iowa has nearly 1.5 million hogs in confinements. Neighboring Louisa County has another 329,000 hogs and only 10,000 people. 1,400 of those people work at the Tyson plant in Columbus Junction that slaughters over 10,000 hogs per day. In northern Iowa, Tyson slaughters 17,000 hogs every day in Storm Lake and 20,000 in Waterloo, and that's just one company. Every county in northwest Iowa with an extreme outlier dot houses between 400,000 and 1 million hogs. Iowa also has the most altered landscape of any state in the country. Over 80% of the land is planted in corn and soybeans. 40% of corn and 70% of soybeans are used for animal feed, so it's all part of the same system. Factory farm animals in Iowa produce a shocking 109 billion gallons of untreated waste. That manure falls into pits directly under the animal confinement buildings. It gets pumped into cesspools and then sprayed or injected into cropland as fertilizer. The volume is far too much for the land to absorb, and it runs into our rivers and streams, the majority of which are impaired. Beaches at lakes around this state are often closed in the summer because of levels of E. coli from animal waste that are too high for humans to swim safely. Next slide. One thing we have less of in rural counties is people. Iowa lost 90% of its hog farms between 1982 and 2022. What that means is that 45,000 families lost their farms. pushed out by the handful of corporations that exercise monopoly control over the pork market. In 1980, farmers like my grandfather might have had a couple hundred pigs on pasture, along with chickens, cows, and grain fields. Now, factory farms are raising on average 12,000 hogs in each in rows of confinement buildings. Big ag consolidation and federal farm bills that deliberately force farmers to get big or get out have caused a population decline of over 278,000 people from rural Iowa. The effect on communities has been devastating. Like many Iowans, I grew up on a farm in southwest Iowa during the 1980s farm crisis. The town where I went to elementary school is now a ghost town. There are no businesses left. The school is closed and consolidated. Houses are abandoned, and those once historic red barns that everyone loves are in ruins. The few young people left have little hope of getting a decent job. So for decades, young people have been moving from farms and small towns to Des Moines for better economic opportunities. But there's a problem. Over 700,000 people in the Des Moines metropolitan area get their drinking water from the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River. The watersheds for those rivers run northwest up to the Minnesota border right through hog country. Several of the extreme outlier counties on the map with millions of hogs are in those watersheds. In response, the city of Des Moines has sued the counties upstream, unsuccessfully, to stop polluting their drinking water, and has built one of the largest nitrate filtration systems in the world. That system costs over $10,000 per day to operate, and Des Moines water ratepayers have been forced to foot the bill. Des Moines drinking water is often just barely below that federal nitrate limit of 10 milligrams per liter. That limit is based on the standard set in the 70s to prevent the condition called blue baby syndrome. The EPA is currently considering lowering the limit because research studies have linked drinking water nitrate concentrations as low as 4 milligrams per liter to several types of cancer. Des Moines officials have publicly stated that they will not be able to meet the federal standard if the nitrate limit is lowered. So it's no surprise that Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the country and is the only state where cancer rates are on the rise. Drinking water nitrate is one possible cause. Pesticides and herbicides are another. And we're just beginning to understand the effect of factory farm air pollution on public health. So Americans may love cheap bacon and pork chops, but the public is paying for this system through the destruction of our natural ecosystems, the hollowing out of our communities, and the loss of our health, and in some cases, our lives. We are fighting to hold the industry accountable by supporting the Clean Water for Iowa Act, which would require factory farms to get discharge permits under the Clean Water Act, just like any other type of factory or municipal wastewater treatment facility. So please check out the links in the chat to get involved.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for all of that powerful and rather concerning information that you shared about Iowa. We're going to drop a link in the chat with more information on how you can take action against factory farms in Iowa. And with that, I would like to thank all of our state organizers who are working hard to fight factory farming across the country. Remember, if you live in one of these states, use the links that we'll be dropping in the chat to take action, especially if you live in New Mexico, Oregon, or Iowa. But before we move on to the Q&A, I also want to mention that we are building campaigns to take on factory farms in other states, New York and California specifically as well. If you live in one of those states, be sure to check out our dashboard of events with upcoming information and to learn more about how you can get involved as well. And don't worry, if you don't live in any of these states, there are still plenty of ways you can get involved. All that information will be available at the link we'll be putting in the chat now. Now we'll be going into our Q&A. For the Q&A, I want to make sure our speakers each get a chance to provide an answer for each question, so I'll ask them to keep their answers brief, and anything we don't get to, we'll take note of to follow up. We also have Food and Water Watch staff standing by to answer questions in the Q&A function. So our first question is going to actually be for our organizers on the impacts of factory farming on our water resources. So the first question, Can you discuss the role of factory farming in ground and surface water contamination, and what regulatory changes are needed to protect our waterways and public health? And maybe, Amy, would you like to start us off?
Of course I would. So as I talked about before, Oregon is facing a serious crisis when it comes to our water resources. Our aquifers are running alarmingly low, and the state has allocated more water than what is available. Water is a finite resource, and we need to protect what we have left by holding Big Ag accountable, not by urging Oregonians to take shorter showers. We also have communities who have been subjected to dangerous levels of nitrates in their groundwater wells for over 3 decades without the state taking any significant measures to curb the nearby industries from continuing to pollute. We need to enact an immediate moratorium on new and expanding factory farms here in Oregon in order to protect our land, natural resources, and the nearby communities facing the brunt of this industry's exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Jennifer, would you like to answer the question?
So as I mentioned, we're fighting for state level legislation for a moratorium on factory farms and for the Clean Water for Iowa Act, which would require factory farms to get permits under the Clean Water Act, because this really is an environmental and public health crisis in Iowa. But I think Iowa's location between the Missouri and Mississippi rivers means that the factory farm system here is also responsible for a significant portion of the pollution that's causing the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So I think it's also important to make sure that the federal farm bill subsidies and public conservation dollars have strings attached. The farm bill should support sustainable organic farming instead of subsidizing factory farms that are destroying our water quality and endangering the biosphere.
Absolutely agree. And Emily, would you like to respond as well?
Yeah, I can speak on New Mexico. So we know the importance of protecting our water here. We live in an extremely water stressed state where we've been experiencing the impacts of the drought for decades now. And so, in communities on the doorsteps of factory farms, we see elevated levels of contaminants like nitrates, which are odorless and tasteless and cause just a litany of public health issues. This poses a risk, especially to folks who rely on private wells, which are not subject to regular testing requirements. In addition to that, factory farms in New Mexico use about 32 million gallons of water every single day. And so, frontline communities obviously feel the impact of this most directly, but in a place where water is so precious, what affects one of our communities affects all of us. We all feel the impacts of the drought, so we all have to work together to combat it. So that means actually funding state agencies that can enforce regulations and regular testing so that we have that data, because data is half the battle. And holding polluters like factory farms accountable for the impact they have on their water, we need to know more about it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your answers. We say in New Mexico, water is life, and it's something that we have to protect all across the country, so appreciate your answers. Our next question is for our research director, Amanda, and this one's specifically about competition. Can you tell us what are some of the biggest challenges that small farmers are facing when competing with large corporations?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I think in many ways the small farmers actually have to cooperate with large corporations. In many cases, for instance, when it comes to dairy farmers, there are fewer and fewer choices dairy farmers have to sell and market their milk. And so oftentimes they do have to work with these large cooperatives, which basically do operate much like corporations. Or if you're trying to get by as an independent hog farmer in Iowa, let's say, you don't really have a lot of choices to where to sell your hogs. So many farmers end up going into contract farming where they contract with, big corporations just so that they have a market for which to sell in. And so it's really unfortunate that this competition is just dwindling. There isn't really much competition left in our agricultural system. And the farms that do still exist, that are truly independent just have a much harder time reaching markets, finding supplies. We've just seen with the growth of factory farms, just guttings of rural communities, the loss of local, feed and other input operations. Farmers are even, having reduced ability even to repair their own machinery because of corporate consolidation. So, yeah, I think it's just the lack of markets for these farmers is the really biggest challenge that are facing them.
Thank you so much for that answer. Yes, we're definitely seeing that in all of these states that we're talking about, as well as other states across the country. We do have one final question before we run up on time, and our final question is actually about corporate consolidation, and this one's for all of our participants. So could the issues posed by factory farms, whether they be environmental, economic, labor, animal welfare, or others, could they be adequately addressed without tackling the issues of corporate consolidation? And Emily, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Yeah. So the short answer to that is no. In recent years, we have only seen the biggest factory farms get bigger, despite the occasional regulatory change or water testing requirement that tends to pop up in New Mexico every few years. And those are great. Those are fantastic that we have those, but they really do not get to the heart of the issue. The fact that as agriculture gets more and more consolidated, the more we'll lose family scale farms who are integral to our history and culture and are inherently more sustainable than the industrial model. Simply trying to get factory farms to do better through regulation does absolutely nothing to make it easier for family scale farms to survive and thrive. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
So no. And I actually think it's important to start naming names of some of these companies. So it's just like big oil or big tobacco. Big ag has a short list of corporations that are profiting at the expense of farmers, workers, communities, and the environment. So our current administration has begun to enforce antitrust laws and the Packers and Stockyards Act, but much more needs to be done about corporate consolidation. And there's a new book that everyone in Iowa has been reading that I would recommend for folks called Barons, and it's about these corporate robber barons who control the food industry, by Austin Frerick. So if folks want to learn more.
Thank you. And Amy, would you like to answer?
Yeah. First of all, Jennifer, thank you for the incredible book recommendation. It's been on my list for a long time. And to answer the question, to agree with everyone else, no. The rise of industrialized animal ag is a symptom of intentional policy decisions that have been backed by corporate ag groups to ensure their ability to increase profits at the expense of our environment, health of our communities, and the economic sovereignty of localized food systems. Our current climate crisis cannot be solved as long as big ag is allowed to pollute indiscriminately. Our public health is jeopardized when our food system is dominated by corporate greed, and local food systems cannot thrive when our policies incentivize this corporate consolidation and the factory farm model. So yeah, answer no.
Thank you. And Amanda?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said. I don't have much more to add to any of that, but yes, I mean, these problems are, as we all noted here, the root cause of it is this corporate consolidation. And as long as we don't address that, even if we have little band-aid solutions along the way, corporations are going to find more ways to profit and off the backs of all of us. So absolutely, that is the heart of this problem and what needs to be addressed most of all.
Great. Thank you all so much for all of your answers. It looks like we are coming up on time for this evening. So I want to thank you all so much for all of your answers. Again, it was really wonderful overview that we had this evening and a discussion of why it's important for everyone to get involved in this work. Again, if you live in New York, California, Iowa, Oregon, or New Mexico, we have a lot of great things coming up. So be sure to get plugged in with the link that we're putting in the chat. If you don't live in one of these states and still want to get involved, we always have ways to get involved with our national work. So be sure to check out the link as well to see what we've got coming up. You can also check out everything that we have going on with our state campaigns. And if you missed it or would like to dive deeper into the research or the map, we'll be following up with that information in an email soon. Again, thank you to Amanda from our research department and our state organizers, Emily, Amy, and Jennifer for all they have shared with us this evening. And thank you all for joining us and spending time with us this evening. We'll see you next time, and we all hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thanks, everyone.